Good morning, everyone. Today's special guest we have with us, which is always an honor, is Laura Matter from the Garden Hotline. We have a bi-monthly special presentation with Laura Matter here from the Garden Hotline, so stay tuned every other month. It'll be the first Saturday of every month or every other month at 10 a.m. And today's wonderful topic is sow and grow, mastering seed magic for vibrant spring and summer gardens. Thank you so much again, Laura, for being here with us.
Excited and happy to do it. I was telling Elizabeth a little while ago as we got on to get going today that I was visiting with one of the pea patch coordinators in Seattle up on the hill in High Point Garden, which is very close to my house. I live in West Seattle because they have some issues with the garden that they want to resolve. And they want the garden hotline and our master composter sustainability stewards to help. Their compost program is not working well there. But we were out there when it was pouring rain and then it turned to snowy rain. And then finally the sun came out and both of us are like, it's time for spring. Let's like get out of this. Um, but everybody's ready, obviously. We got through some lovely weather in February, which got everybody out and inspired. But still pretty early in the season. So this is great timing to be thinking about what you're doing and what you want to do in your garden, and how to get things started for yourself. So let's see which thing is going to work. So today what we're going to talk about is healthy soils and how to, a little bit about how to build them to yourself, but also a lot about soil products, because often when we're starting seeds, we're buying things that are already made for us. And we want to pick the right thing for the right use. What kind of fertilizers are best to use, and then just in general about a little bit about fertilizers, how to choose lights for seed starting. There is such a plethora of choice now that didn't used to be there. It used to be you just had to get the ballast and the fluorescent tubes and set all that up. And now there's all kinds of sleek, modern methods. You can still do that. You can still have those settings. Some of them are smaller and more compact, so easier to use. And also you can get, really cool setups that are all built in to grow in the house. And then seed starting basics, just things you need to be thinking about, including timing and how to decide what you're going to grow when it gets started. And then sowing calendars at the very end, sort of reinforcing those concepts. So that's what we're looking at. I have a question for you guys. You can just put this in the chat and we'll collect it later. But how much experience do you have in starting plants for an edible garden? None at all. You've done some edible gardening, seed starting, and you have a great deal of experience. And then number two, why do you want to grow food? And the reason I ask these questions is we're funded through the Seattle Public Utilities lines of water business and through the hazardous waste management program. And so they ask us to get feedback from folks about, how much they know and what kind of impact we're having when we're talking to you as well. So a little bit of survey work. So those are my two questions. Do you want me to leave them up there for a sec, or you guys? Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Beautiful. Yay.
Okay. Shall we move on?
Perfect.
All right. So the first thing I always talk about in any talk that you hear me give, even if I'm talking to you about pollinators or beneficials, um, or pesticides, I'm always talking about soil because soil is the key to plant health. Soil, we want you to think about it as habitat, not as just this inert thing that we walk around on. There's depth to it. There's things happening underneath your feet. Um, and it's important for it to be a healthy space. So healthy soil will drain well. It will nourish your plants. And the goal of feeding your plants is to feed your soil, which in turns then feed your plants. And it doesn't introduce toxins to the garden. So in urban spaces, this is a big topic and consideration. There's a lot of concern about what is in our soil. If we're growing food in it, how is that affecting us? And so that's one of the things the Garden Hotline does is kind of continually keep getting educated about that. And there's webinars that have come along in more recent years from soil scientists who have done research and work in gardens in Chicago, New York, Louisiana, and New Orleans, where there are some pretty urban spaces, looking at how the things in the soil are affecting plants, whether plants take it up or not. So there's lots of information out there about that. And if you want to know more, please, just check in with us and we can cover ground on that. You need to be able to feed your soil. So you need to keep refreshing it because if you're growing food in it, you're going to deplete the nutrients in it. And one thing you can do to help your soil be healthy is to add compost. You can also grow cover crops, which is what you're seeing in this picture. This is all annual ryegrass that was grown over the winter, and this is early spring. And or at some point in about a month or so, this got turned under. This was at Picardo Pea Patch where I used to garden. And it got turned under, and then that adds nitrogen to the soil. It also adds food for all those microorganisms, and it also adds sort of structure to the soil. So super important to think about soil's habitat and how you go about keeping that healthy. So what is soil? Soil is actually a combination of things built over time, a long time. Like the soil that's on the planet that we use and that we farm in has been built over time from lots of different mechanisms in the Northwest, from glaciers, from volcanoes, from rivers. So flooding areas actually create flooded areas. River areas create soil. The Kent Valley, for example, is a good illustration of where there was beautiful farming soil, which is why farms were created there and then got a lot of that got scraped off, sold into the industry. It's in our gardens all over the place now because years ago when they started putting up all the warehouses down there, they took all the soil out to be able to level the ground. And the farms aren't there so much anymore. There is some protected area of farmland in King County, just south of Kent, but not like there used to be. And part of why that land is so beautiful is that the water moves. And that's why floods happen, why you don't build on land like that, because you can't predict where the water flow is going to go. But all of that process has deposited mineral matter everywhere. And so it can vary depending on where you are. You can have volcanic soils vary a little bit from riverbed soils or lake bed from, other types of air processes. And the glaciation, of course, left all kinds of stuff, including some really tough concrete type soils that are full of rock, especially sort of in the higher ground in the Puget Sound Basin. Thinking about places like Greenwood in Seattle versus places like Magnolia or Ballard, which is very sandy as the edges of where the glaciation came in and carved out Puget Sound. But it's also all the organic matter from everything that has lived in this area and dies in this area and goes back to the soil. That organic matter is what feeds all these soil organisms that actually then can convert that material to something that plants can use. It has to have air, it has to breathe, it has to have water. So there has to be some, so it's not compacted, so that plant roots can actually need gas exchange, and they need that in the ground. Yes.
We have a question. Does clay fall into the concrete category? That's a great question.
Not really. Clay is kind of its own thing. So what I'm talking about is what we call glacial till, which is kind of a mix of rock and other, clay could be included in that, but it's the um, it's the compacted soils that are really hard to grow in. Clay is very dense. It has small pore spaces. You can break it up by putting compost into it, but it doesn't have as much organic matter. It's pretty mineral rich. And then sand would be the other end of that spectrum, which is also very mineral rich, but has tons of pore space, and water flows through it and nutrients too fast. And so it's that organic matter that actually ties both of those together or makes them more functional for plants. They have their place, and they were created as they were. But if you want good plants to grow there, you have to have a different um, setup. Also, if you're growing ornamental plants in a garden, and even some fruiting like trees and shrubs, you can adapt what you grow to the kind of soil you have, so you don't have to do huge amendments. So something like a blueberry likes boggy, wet soils. Um, Something like ferns can grow in kind of, they can grow in clay soils with some leaf duff, and it's just different plants will thrive in different areas as they developed, as they grew. You have to have water, obviously, for plants, and water has to be able to stay in the soil. And then you have soil microorganisms and macroorganisms. And what I mean by that is there's things you don't see with the naked eye, and there are things that you do. And those things that we do see are the things we are, as human beings, often squeamish about: worms and pill bugs and, you know, different little critters that are crawling around in there. Those guys are doing work for you. So it's super important for them to be there, because they're the ones who are breaking all this nutrient up and making it available to plants. And in some cases, like in the case of just different kinds of fungi, they actually, in the soil, the mycelium threads that come out of the fruiting bodies, that are sort of, you can sort of think about them as a root system. They will wrap themselves around roots and exchange nutrients that way, or embed themselves into roots and actually insert nutrients. What they're getting in exchange are the sugars from the plants, because they don't photosynthesize, and the fungi, and they have to get nutrient from plants, sugars, in order to have those carbohydrates that they need. So there's quite a lot of activity going on that we never even think about. That's super important for the health of our plants. So one thing to be cautious of when you're preparing soil in the spring, and this is beyond the seeding thing where we can control what soils we're using, and we're often indoors and using bagged soil. If you're going to go out in the garden and you want to seed directly into a garden, this is what I was thinking about yesterday when I was talking to Bun Lee up in the High Point Garden, is that, it's wet up there still. And not very many people have been gardening, but there are things growing that have overwintered there. There's a lot of Cambodian, Vietnamese, Laotian gardeners in that area. And there's tons of like garlic and green onions, and there's a bunch of kale and different things that have overwintered, but nobody's digging yet. Like there was only one bed that I saw where somebody had moved the soil around. But if you have a raised bed, you're going to have better luck with this to get things in much earlier, but you don't want to turn soil over when it's wet. If you have very wet soil, you're going to compact it. The act of turning it, the act of, you're sort of smashing it. Soil will be ready to plant directly into when you can form it into a ball and toss it in the air in your hand, and it breaks apart when it hits your hand, or breaks apart in the air. So you don't want it to stay in a ball. If it's like that, there's still too much moisture in it. You can warm the soil up by laying down floating row cover, which is Remay is one of the brand names, or burlap. That can help um, sometimes warming the soil will help to disperse some of that water. But sometimes you just have to wait. And then you want to be testing soil periodically. Some people do it every year. You don't necessarily need to, but in the spring is a good time to see where you are with nutrients, what your plants are going to need, and also depending on what you're going to grow. If you're growing things like brassicas, collards, cabbages, those are big leafy things that need a lot of nitrogen. And often nitrogen is depleted over the course of the summer when we use the garden. And with the winter rain, if you haven't protected your soil, a lot of nutrients could have leached out, including calcium. The loss of calcium in soil is what makes our soil acidic in the Pacific Northwest, which is why often it's recommended to add lime, which is calcium carbonate. So there's lots of reasons to test soil. Minimizing your soil profile, even if it is ready to go, is always helpful. So there's a lot of no-till gardening going on these days in order to not disturb the home of all those critters that are helping you. There's no way you're ever going to be not do some disturbance, but the whole idea of double digging and really turning soil over isn't always necessary. Creating a new garden sometimes necessitates that you have to do all those things, but you don't necessarily need to do that every year and all the time. And then add compost if needed. Compost can be too much of a good thing. You don't want more than 5% organic matter in soil profiles. Compost adds that organic matter. And if the Tilt Garden in Wallingford, we measured it, this was years ago now, but somebody had the idea that, we just keep adding wood chips to the paths and compost to the beds. Let's test. We had like 22% organic matter in that soil. And so they had to lay off for a while. They had to try and mineralize it, bring other things in and try to, sort of dilute that organic matter because there was too much of it. And what happens is nutrients get tied up in that organic matter, and then it's not available to plants. So here's an example of a soil test. Some of you may have done this. King Conservation District does offer free soil tests for certain cities. I'm not sure. I think Federal Way might not contribute to this. I can't remember. There's a couple of cities in King County. These are tax dollars coming into the King Conservation District, which is not, they're a nonprofit. It's not a government agency, but they work with government. So they use that money to do a soil testing program for residents, and that's free. I imagine that if you are in the Federal Way area and they aren't allowed to do it, they could still do it for a fee. But there are other companies that do this, like Soil Test Farm Consultants and AmTest Laboratories. And some of them too, what KCD is looking at is just nutrient. So they're checking for your soil pH, which is this number here. And that's 5.6 is a little lower than we would want for vegetables. And this is what down here, it tells us what the crop is. So usually they'll you give them that information when you put the soil test in, and then they're analyzing against all these nutrients to tell you down here what you're going to need. And so they're telling this person to put dolomite, that's lime, that's also calcium, but it's also got some magnesium in it because of this lower pH. And also the magnesium isn't super high, so the dolomite works pretty well. If they had a really high magnesium reading, they'd probably just tell them to use straight line, the calcium carbonate. You can call us when you get soil tests and we can walk you through what they actually mean and what they say. The nitrogen here you can see is very low. Does this have a date on it? Not sure, but at any rate, if this is an early spring reading, this wouldn't be abnormal. That would be what you would expect. You can see the calcium's low, so that's, also the whole idea of needing the lime, and that's what's affecting the pH. This little thing over here is showing um, other extra information about the soil, which helps to look at what we call the cation saturation. And what that means is how available nutrients are. So um, these guys have electrical charge, and if they're too electrified, so to speak, the nutrients hang on to each other and they don't become available to plants. So, there's a lot of science here, but basically, our reading of these is just to say, gosh, they're telling you you need to add this amount of stuff. And then they're telling you the rate at 1,000 square feet. If this was a farm, they'd be telling them rate per acre. So, we can help convert that also down to 100 square foot garden if that's all you have. We can figure that out and drop it down. But yeah, so there's lots of good info here. If you go to places like Soil Test Farm Consultants, they're over in Moses Lake. You can also look at things like, do I have heavy metals in my soil? Do I have hydrocarbons? You have to test for each thing you want to know about separately. They do a heavy metal panel, I believe. The things that we worry about in the Northwest, in particular, your area in Federal Way South, any areas that were affected by the Tacoma smelter could have arsenic, cadmium, or lead in the soil as legacy of that smelter that pumped that smokestack pumped out for 100 years. And it went along especially along the shores of the area. It was out in Ruston, and so really perfectly placed to sort of, spread everywhere. Vashon, Maury Island in particular, really affected where I used to live out there, and I didn't grow a garden for on purpose. At that time, I wasn't thinking about raised beds. That was many years ago, but it's unfortunate because you have to keep those things in mind to know how healthy your soil is. All right, so now we're looking at manufactured soil products. These are the things you're using to grow in. And so these are some of the potting soils that you're going to find out there that are, especially these three are really present, very easy to find. They're all really different from each other. They have different kinds of ingredients in them. Cedar Grove is very local. It is based on our yard waste, our yard and food waste, along with mined sand that they get. I think the last time I checked with them, it was coming from Montana, but that changes depending on where their sources are. But it's consistent. Their materials are fairly consistent. A lot of people worry about Cedar Grove because it's coming from our yard waste, but just so you know, the U.S. Composting Council that's labeled here has very stringent testing. And this is a registered material for use in organic agriculture. So it has been tested and approved and is below threshold for any of the things that people worry about. Yep.
We have a question. Can anything be done for heavy metals?
That's a great question. Yes. So what you do is dilute, number one. So the less percentage you have, the better. If you have really intense levels of heavy metals, that can trigger. We have known people that had to remove soil from their yard. There was a house here in the Cherry Hill neighborhood in Seattle. One of our master composters did soil testing. We expect to see heavier lead around old buildings. She had a house built in the 1800s, was the original farmhouse in her neighborhood, and all the houses around her were built more in the 60s. So she had this original farmhouse that had been there for a long time. And she found an area, around her house, she found a lot of lead because lead paint was a thing and people used it on houses. And so paint chips get into the soil and it puts lead into the soil. She found it out in the middle of her backyard. And what we realized after sort of, looking at her property, looking at it on a map, there was a driveway that came behind the houses to the south of her that led to her fence, and it was a solid fence now. But I think at one time that was an actual access into her property, and there had probably been a garage or at least cars parking on that site. So she found a lot of stuff there that was probably from leaded gasoline that had been, seeped into the ground over time because it was probably a place where cars were parking for many, many, many years. And so she had to remove that soil because it goes against, health standards. So it can trigger all kinds of things. Um, the other thing you can do is mulch over soils like this so that they're not being like volatilized, so to speak. It doesn't get volatile in that sense, but the dust coming up off the soil particles could carry some of these metals with them. So mulching areas, especially in ornamental beds. If you're growing vegetables, recommendation is generally using a raised bed where it's not going to be a problem. You can line the raised bed with landscape fabric at the bottom and up the sides, and then you're not digging into it. And so you're not moving that contaminated soil into your gardening space. And all those things work real well. We've had people do testing, like do little experiments where they grew potatoes in the ground and grew them in a raised bed in a yard they knew had lead in the soil, and they found it in the potatoes that was in the ground and nothing in the one that was in the raised bed. So it worked really well. And those are the general recommendations, is dilution and then also just avoidance of that soil. Um, there are more studies that have happened over time showing also that there are some forms of lead that become non-bioavailable, so they don't affect you. And that's more recent news. And that was some of what came out of those studies for the folks that were working in, I think she was in New Orleans, the woman who came up with that information. But we'll be following more of that and getting more information on that. If you have more questions about it, we can do some more research for you as well. So these bagged soils, these are three you're going to see a lot. They vary in content quite a bit. As I said, Cedar Grove is local and has yard waste from our area. Black gold is heavily in peat moss. I'm hoping they move towards coconut coir at some point, because peat moss is non-renewable and coconut coir works the same way. And then the Kellogg's you'll see a lot, the stripy bag. This is very local, it's fairly local as well. But the thing about Kellogg's that I'm concerned about for potting soil, they put a lot of fertilizers in here, so it works real well the first year, and then the second year it kind of isn't as helpful. But it's really woody, so it's not as delightful for vegetables as either something like black gold or cedar grove is. There's tons of wood product in this soil mix. And I've actually opened some bags. We've used this in different projects that we did with folks who bought the soil to bring to the workshops we were doing. And I've opened several bags over the course of the last few years that were just almost straight bark. And so it's variable too in quality. But the soil, if you get a good bag, it works really well. We did fill a raised bed in White Center with this soil, and the stuff grew like crazy. So, different qualities, different things that you're looking for depending on what you're growing. If you have things like blueberry, they're going to love the Kellogg soil because they like woody soils. It's good for them. You can, at some nurseries, see examples of the soil and feel them, look at them. Sky Nursery does that. So do some of the other actual nurseries. And many of these are available in bulk. Cedar Grove certainly is. There's another product available in bulk called Lens. Lens soils, and they are up in Stanwood. You can buy that in bulk and order it and have it delivered. And they have beautiful soil. They are also one of the yard waste, food waste vendors for the city of Seattle, and take and make a really nice compost out of the that waste, and it's a little different process than what Cedar Grove uses, but it's really beautiful compost. And they use that to blend their soils. Here's an example of an ingredients list on the back of a bag. So this is a Dr. Earth product, which is available lots of places. Um, and again, you're going to see a ton of this fir bark again, um, sawdust right away. So at the top, the ingredients go by percentage, just like on a food label. And so you're going to see there's a lot of wood in here. But they've also added a bunch of stuff to combat that, like alfalfa meals, high in nitrogen. Fish bone and bone meals have lots of potassium. Um, Feather meal and kelp meal also have lots of other minor ingredients that are helpful. Feather meal can have a little nitrogen in it too. And then they put microbes in it, and they put some dolomite lime. So they're bringing some calcium to the mix. So it's thoughtful in the sense that they're like, actually creating a recipe, thinking about what plants might need. You can see the whole list of all the non-plant food ingredients, all of the little critters that they put in there, all the ecto and endomycorrhiza, and then also the bacillus. These are actual like virus. Well, they are um, I think they're viral um, critters. I have to check that, but these guys, you'll see these used for sprays for killing things like caterpillars, and they can affect the soil. So there's all kinds of forms of them. And these guys are things that actually help create healthy soil. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. But you can read the label, see what they're telling you. They, of course, have, their instructions for how to use it. And these guys you see have different kinds of seals on here that are telling you that the ingredients have been checked as well. And these guys are based in California, but they're available everywhere. You also want to look for seed starting mix if you're starting seeds. So the potting soils are good for transplanting into. Sometimes I start directly in potting soils, depending on what I'm starting. Many things do better to start in a seedling mix, which is lighter weight. It drains really well, but it's not as nutritious. So you don't need them there for very long. It's meant to enable the seed to germinate very quickly. It's not intended to grow in because it doesn't have enough nutrient. You have to transplant it out. So some of them do, though, contain fertilizers. So be aware of that. So something like Miracle Grow will have probably a chemical fertilizer. So if you don't want to use chemical fertilizers, and we usually recommend natural slow release organic fertilizers because they don't disturb, even in a back soil, you're going to have, the microorganisms that you need for plant health. It disturbs that environment, and you're depending on a chemical fertilizer instead. But Miracle Grow also they have had, the foresight to actually create a lot of organic products as well. So you can find all kinds of things out there, but it's easy to find. So that's really available. Black Gold has a seedling mix as well. And then this Rosy Soil is brand new. I just seen things about it this year. I know nothing about it yet, but I'm going to check it out. I followed some link, I think maybe even on Facebook, that gave me a coupon for trying it, and it's sold in some places locally in the Northwest. So lots of things out there. Seedling mixes are really nice, lightweight too, so really easy to work with. But you can also make your own. So you can use something like coconut coir, which is what we're looking at in the middle, the perlite, which is this rock on the left, and then the vermiculite. And vermiculite is mica that has been sort of like manipulated and, broken apart to create these little curls of mica that you add. It's very lightweight. It absorbs water, it holds it, it's sterile. So it's not like giving any nutrient, but it can actually absorb and hold on to nutrients and have them available to plants. Coconut coir is sort of the medium, like this fake soil, so to speak. It's the thing that plants can really benefit from growing in, and also helps hold water. And then The perlite is volcanic rock and it's porous. You can see all the little pore spaces in it. It breaks apart really easily, and that actually helps the soil drain. And usually you want it to stay. This is a close-up picture. You want it to stay chunky because you want all those gaps in the soil. You don't want it too compacted. So you use 2 parts coconut coir, 1 part perlite, 1 part vermiculite. Anything you want to use to measure. So your part could be a cup. It could be this coffee cup I got. It could be a yogurt tub. It could be a scoop, that I have scoops for my soil. So I could do 1 scoop of perlite, 1 of vermiculite, and 2 of coconut coir, and then I mix that up. So it's scalable, which is really nice. You don't have to have like this exact measure. You're just talking about proportions. You want to mix it and wet it down before planting. You don't have to wet it while it's mixed. You can keep it dry in your container that you mixed it in. But as soon as you put it into the pots or the flat or whatever you're using, then you want to spray that down first. Coconut coir needs to be wetted because it will repel water like peat moss can as well. And so again, we're avoiding peat moss here because it's not renewable, and we're using the coconut coir in place of that, and it works pretty well. Then here's some of the seals that you're going to see that tell you whether there's organic certification for your product. So the registered materials seals, what was on that Cedar Grove bag. OMRI listed is on many, many things. And OMRI is the Organics Material Review Institute. This is also a nonprofit that actually tests products. Often you're going to see this on things you buy in nurseries and garden centers, sprays, soil, seed starting mixes, any product that's used in growing. And so this lets people know that it can be used in organic agriculture. And these seals were developed primarily for people who are growing commercially so that they can show, their certification. Depends on them using the right things, that they can't use things that aren't certified, or they lose their certification for their product that they're selling. So that's why this is saying registered material for use in organic agriculture. You'll see sometimes USDA symbols. You'll see sometimes ones from California. California has its own certification program, and you'll see that sometimes on products that you buy here, or Oregon Tilth, who also does certification. So all of those are things that you might see on a product bag, and what you should be looking for to know if this is important to you. And then compost will condition your soil. And what we're seeing here in this picture on the top, this is a compost giveaway the city of Seattle does for its residents. And that compost is the lens compost I was talking about, which is really beautiful. And this was a compost giveaway in Southeast Seattle some years ago. Tilth, we used to manage those compost giveaways, and ECOS, the Environmental Coalition of South Seattle, now manages those, and we took on a piece of work that they had. So we switched jobs, but Tilth had been really involved in the compost giveaways for many, many years. Super fun. People get very excited. Free compost. Residents in Seattle get up to a quarter yard for free, and it's sort of a thank you for participating in the recycling program, but also organics recycling, but also done in areas where they're trying to encourage people to do more because they're not meeting their quota of what they really want to see happening. So it's kind of an incentive program. But compost is, you can see it's quite beautiful. Looks like soil. It's not. It's organic matter, and but makes for beautiful compost. And this is one of the old time pea patch gardeners. Look at that soil that he's digging up, how gorgeous that is, and adding compost to that. You can buy this bagged. You can buy it in bulk. There are different kinds. Some things are made from, so you'll buy compost chicken manure. That's compost, but it's also a fertilizer. It's high in nitrogen. So this is a product that you want to be aware you're adding nitrogen, and you don't necessarily need to add more if you're using this as your compost source. There's the Cedar Grove compost. Cedar Grove right now has some sort of, I think it's still going on, buy 2 bags, get 1 free. And I think it's for both compost and potting soil, but So if you can find that deal still going on, that's a really good deal to use. And they have the Omri seal here that you can see, as well as the Washington one in the compost council. And then here's the black gold compost, also has an Omri seal. GB Organics has the Omri seal. So, and then many of these in other places you would see, I think this is probably a compost seal of some sort, because composting is highly regulated. So lots of nitrogen in chicken manure. If you get worm castings, which aren't shown in this picture, you can find compost that is straight worm castings. That's really rich in micronutrients. It's kind of like, we call that the Cadillac of compost because it's so beautiful. You can buy it in bulk and in bags. And in the South End, these are some of the sources for getting things. Carponitos has it, Burien Bark, Cedar Grove has stuff available everywhere. They also have different yards that you can check out. The one I go to is, of course, the Seattle one. It's in the Georgetown area. But it's, the stuff is everywhere, available lots of places, sometimes even at outside grocery stores. They love the Northwest because our grocery stores sell compost right outside the store, which is fabulous. You will get access, right, Elizabeth, to this too, so you don't have to write everything down here. This is a lot of sources. Then you can grow your own fertilizer essentially and compost in place by doing this, what we call living mulch. And we call it living mulch because often it's done over the winter. These are winter cover crops that protect soil, prevent that nutrient loss, especially the calcium from all the rain. Calcium's highly mobile and will just dissipate from the soil. In this case, these are very shallow raised beds, so it just kind of goes out into the concrete around it. But in soil that's like intact garden space, that's not a raised bed, the calcium just goes lower in the soil than the plant roots can access. They're typically cereal grains or pea family plants that are mixes that are done in the winter. You can have summer cover crops as well if you have an area that you need to refresh. You could put things like phacelia or buckwheat into it, and they are great flowering cover crops for pollinators. If you let the pea family plants bloom, they're also great for early pollinators, but you want to catch all of these things before they seed, or else you're having, babies in your garden that you have to weed out. What you see in the middle here is a mix of rye and vetch together. And there was, I think, maybe some winter pea in here as well. But there's quite a mix of cover crops. You can get the mix, you can buy them separate, and you have to turn them in. Or in the case of these beds, what you're seeing here was early in the season. By the time we went to turn them in, they were about 3 feet tall. And we actually had to cut the tops off, put that all on a tarp, flip over the roots, and then we used the cut parts as mulch and just threw it over the top of what we turned over so that it would still decay and still be part of the process. The real big benefit of these is all the nitrogen that they add. So all that leaf matter has full of nitrogen because the photosynthetic process requires chlorophyll in these in the plants. All of those cells actually are nitrogen is the big part of that process. And so you have that, but in the pea family, you also have specialized root nodules, which create nitrogen from atmospheric nitrogen that is not available to plants. It's taken in by the roots. There are special little microorganisms in these little nodules on the root that convert it to a form that plants can use. And then that plant can use it, the plant that's growing, but also when you break it apart, and some of it does leach out in the soil anyway, but when you break it apart, it all releases into the soil. So you have even more nitrogen available. And they're beautiful. They're actually really pretty. It covers your bed. It keeps the weeds out over the winter. If you were to leave this bare, something's going to grow there because that's what nature does. It fills that vacuum, and you will have things maybe you don't want growing there. Instead, you have something that's useful that you are controlling in that setting. So nutrients, the macronutrients we look at and that we see on labels where we see these numbers like this 462 on this down to earth fertilizer are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the nitrogen is really important for that chlorophyll production that I mentioned, needs that nitrogen to make it happen in the cells. That spurs vegetative growth, the leaves, the stems, healthy foliage. You can imagine that's why I say things like collards need a lot of nitrogen because they are big green, deep green leaves, and they have lots of need for nitrogen. Phosphorus helps with the development of flowers. It also helps with the sort of cellular processes, the DNA and RNA synthesis, and then helps create strong roots, which are important to be able to pull nutrients out of the soil and anchor a plant as well. And then potassium builds cell integrity. It strengthens the plant, makes it stand up strong, not flop over on you. And it helps to synthesize proteins and carbohydrates to feed the plant itself. So those are the major nutrients. There's lots of other nutrients that are needed in plants. But what you see on the box generally is that NPK, because these are the things we're looking for. When you're looking at natural fertilizers, they're always going to be lower than 10 or lower. If you start to see things a little higher, sometimes there's chemicals in there. 12 might be okay. You get into something that says 20, 20, 20, it's bound to be a chemical fertilizer. You also see the OMRI listing here on this box. And they tell you to compost the box because it's all cardboard. So you could chop that up and put it in your compost. Here's some other examples. There's the Dr. Earth tomato, vegetable, herb. You also see formulations based on what you're trying to fertilize. If you're fertilizing blueberries, it's going to have a different need, sometimes a different form of nitrogen. So it might have something like cottonseed meal as opposed to alfalfa meal because it is more compatible with acidic soils. And so there's lots of science that goes into determining how to formulate all these things. And people have done a really good job of kind of creating all these things. You can use liquid fertilizers like the fish fertilizer. Anybody who's used this knows the smell is an issue. It dissipates outdoors. So you want to be careful if you're having seedlings inside. The granular fertilizers are good to put in the soil as you're starting to transplant things. These fish fertilizers are good to use in water as you're watering things. And you can dilute them down too. So you're just kind of giving a micro dose to things. The kelp meal doesn't have, you can see that NPK, it's kind of blurry, but it's very small. And there's no phosphorus in here at all, but only 0.13% nitrogen as opposed to 5% nitrogen in fish fertilizer. These are for leafy growth fish fertilizers. And then the kelp meals are for strengthening plants. It's good for transplant shock. It's good for plants that have gone through maybe that heat dome that we had in June. I use this a lot right after that because it helps plants sort of stabilize. You can also use single elements. So if you get that soil test and you find out you don't need everything, you just need something, maybe what you need is potassium, and you can get something like green sand, which is going to give you that. Or maybe you need phosphorus, bone meal will give you that. Or maybe you really need nitrogen, the blood meal is very high. So here's an example of that 12 I mentioned. So this is a natural product, but it is just nitrogen. There's nothing else here. Maybe you have a very low pH, you need to add lime, you need to add that calcium, or the kelp meal. Again, these are low numbers, but it has all those micronutrients. Cottonseed meal is one of those things that has a fair amount of nitrogen. It's really good for acidic plants as well. So lots of different products out there. You can see most of these things. I don't know if Espoma has the certification. They often tend to mix chemical and natural. And I'd have to look at the back of this bag to see what was going on with it. So the Espoma products I always look at carefully because they are sometimes a blend, but anything coming from down to earth is usually just, natural ingredients. If you can read the list and understand what the ingredients are, it doesn't have chemical names, then those are natural fertilizers. All right, let's look at what plants need. So vegetable gardens in general, growing outdoors in your house, in your garden, need 6 to 8 hours of direct sun daily. You can play with that a little bit, but this can be over the whole day with shade at times. It doesn't have to be like all 6 to 8 hours happen at the same time. And many of our gardens don't function that way. We have houses, trees, the sun moves, things get shaded. You can still grow some things in lower light settings, but fruiting plants generally need the most sun in order to really produce. And then green leafy plants, they can be okay for a little bit of shade. Some of the herbs that we recommend that can work in shadier spots are things like mint or chives or parsley, and they'll be okay. But in general, if you have 6 to 8 hours of sun, your kale is going to be more robust than it is going to be if you only have 3 or 4 hours of sun. But it will still grow. It just won't be as big a leaf necessarily or as thick a leaf, and it does affect it. So starting plants under lights, I know somebody said, who was that said, was that Kay, was that you? Kay Pinard here. Yeah, you had a setup already in your garden, in your house. Yeah. What do you have?
Can I just show it to you?
Sure.
I've got a light and I've just added some, oh, come on, machine, help me out here. There we go. Okay. I've got a light that my son got for free at college. I've got some recycled materials that I'm using for potting. There we go. Let's turn this around. Let's see if I can
Yeah,
get it.
you have. Great. Wonderful.
So I've got, right now I'm experimenting with temperature. I've got 2 dog heating pads under it, which weren't quite enough. So I tossed I don't have any seeds planted yet. I'm just messing with it.
Sure.
I've got a human heating pad under there, which I don't think I have enough of to really make this work, but it did get it up to the right temperature. Amazon has heating pads for $25 for 2, which is about right for me, but I'm afraid they'll only last 1 year. So I'm considering brands. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm happy to see that light, because what I was trying to illustrate in this picture here is there's so many different setups and there are so many new kinds of lights. And sometimes people just use regular lights, and you can change out the bulb. Like you can have just a little desk lamp that you change bulbs out in and get something has more spectrums in it. But most things work to some degree. If you have full light spectrum, you're going to have better plant growth. And if you have fluorescent lights, you have to set them lower above the seedlings. You can't have it too close, so 4 inches maybe and high, and then you raise them as you go. LED lights need to be higher because they're super intense and you burn the little seedlings. But the bulbs that you buy, the lights that you buy have recommendations and tell you what to do. And then you mentioned Amazon. They have a ton of different products. Like this is just a little clip-on light. And I actually bought a light on stands that has 4 arms, and it's not for seedlings, but it's for my house plants that are in the front corner of my house, because only in the summertime do they get enough sunlight. In the winter, it's pretty dark in there. And so that's on, I think, about 6 hours a day, comes on midday and then kind of goes into the evening. And so it's kind of gives them a longer growing season, so to speak, during the day. But there's so many products out there. You can have this sort of more traditional light setup with the fluorescent tubes. And this is a more modern one. Sometimes people string them up on stands and then you have little chains that you can keep lifting them with. And then there's these really fancy products like this one. I think, I'm trying to remember where I saw this. This might have been at Johnny's or somewhere. And they have the heat domes on them as well, the things that can protect the plants, and you can do whole flats of things. But there's lots of things out there, super fun. You can also use natural sunlight, any bright, really bright window. The problem with us is that we have days, today it would be sunny, but you know, yesterday kind of off and on, you can have really dark days. And so it's going to go more slowly, and your plants could stretch a bit and you have to keep rotating them. But there are ways to make that work for you. But I love your little light because you can have things also in a window, but have this extra, you know, light that's just small. It's a small footprint. It doesn't have to take up the space that people think it does. So seedlings need longer periods of light. They need at least 12 to 16 hours of light. Otherwise, you know, you're going to get this kind of weird stretching that happens. So this is an example of something that didn't get enough light and didn't have the right setting over it. You can be successful with fewer light hours, but that's kind of 12 hours is probably a good basic minimum for them. You're not trying to replicate a natural system that would be outdoors right now, because that's not when these things would be germinating normally. Most of these things don't. There's certain things that are germinating in the gardens right now, the things like those little cress weeds. You know, obviously they don't need a lot of light to germinate because they're successful and they're blooming right now. They're doing their thing. So they go through their life cycle, but many of the things we're trying to grow in nature would need this amount of light in outside to be able to do their thing. So we're replicating that by putting it inside. And then this getbusygardening.com, she had a great blog. I borrowed her picture to show you and also put her website down here because she's got some great information on her site as well about all the things she's learned. You can kind of see she's got these sort of sitting in plastic to bottom water, looks like. You can choose lots of different kinds of growing containers. This is your classic black growing pot that we buy many things from the nursery in. You can have coconut coir pots. You can have peat pots. There are clay. The thing I'll say about these three, coconut coir is a little better. Peat and clay dry out really fast. It could be good for certain kinds of seedlings that don't want to stay super wet, but be aware that that can be this product, the peat, and again, not renewable, can become hydrophobic. And clay just breathes and lets all the water out very easily. And then this bottom picture, these are soil blocks. You can buy these soil blocker tools that you see sitting here, make big ones, little ones. Basically, they create a pot made out of a specialized soil mix. They tell you how to do that soil mix that will hold together really well. And you just drop the seed inside that little hole and cover it up. And then when you go to transplant, you can take that little guy and just pop it into this bigger soil block over here. And you don't have any pots, you don't have any plastics, and they work really well. You do need, this is showing them out of trays, but you do need trays to set them in of some sort so that you can bottom water them. But we have used these at times. Nurseries, it's not good for, you know, nurseries that are doing huge production because it's time consuming and you know, doesn't transfer as well, doesn't travel very well. But for home growing, it's a really great opportunity to avoid using products like that. We use a lot in our plant starts work. My team also does work where we give plant starts away to refugee immigrant communities, multifamily housing, low-income housing sites, community gardens that are growing for food banks. And we're focusing on culturally relevant plants on purpose, things that are hard to find and can't source in nurseries. And so we're growing things that folks really want to grow in their own gardens. There's one plant called Managu, for instance, which is an African nightshade. It is looks like the weedy nightshades that we see, not the bittersweet type that grows like a vine, but other nightshades you might see in a garden. It's related to tomato, but it's an edible plant. So the leaves are edible and people don't know that. They think it's poison because it's nightshade, and it's not, and it's used as a leafy green, and it's not available at all commercially. So we grow that and give that away. But we use a lot of these because, especially this year, our ask for plants, we gave away around 12,000 pots of plants last year. which is, some of those are 1 tomato in a pot. Some of those are 20 onions in a pot. So number of plants, I can't tell you because I didn't do that math. But we gave away 12,000. We haven't asked for about 50,000 this year. So we're scaling back what we thought we were going to give it to them in, like for gardens that are community gardens that they're going to plant directly into the ground. We're going to give them things in these 50. So this is a 72 cell tray. So we'll be like sort of changing our program a little bit to not give them fully potted things for those people that can just plant directly. Because then we can have a 72, if we were to do 72 4-inch pots, that's about, what's the math? Let's see, 18 times 7, I think. It's about 7 flats. So 6 to 7 flats. So we go from 1 flat, 7 flats down to 1. So you can grow a lot of things. And this is really good for home gardeners because sometimes you don't need them to grow very long in here. You're just trying to get them big enough to get them out in the garden, especially the cool season things, which we'll talk about in a second. So you don't need to grow them all out into big 4-inch pots. You can save yourself space, time. You can get more things. This doesn't all have to be one variety. You can do 2 rows of one kind of lettuce, 2 rows of your chard, 2 rows of collards. You can kind of mix it up. And everything's right there and it's ready. When it's ready, you just take it out and plant it. It's been 1 tray, can be really helpful. Some cases, things like tomatoes, peppers, they benefit from being potted up. So those hot weather crops, it's ideal to put them into bigger pots before you set them out to get them bigger. But all those leafy greens, you don't really need to do that. And you can use recycled containers or create your own out of things like newspaper. Newspaper is harder to find, but you know what I'm getting a lot of right now? If I order something, I get a lot of like butcher paper stuffing in my boxes. And I've been saving all that because we do teach people how to make paper pots in workshops. And we use it as shredded bedding for compost bin classes that we do. So now I'm using packing paper rather than newspaper. We don't have as much newspaper anymore. It's not as readily available. But it works. You can just roll it up and secure the bottom, use like a little piece of Scotch tape on it, or staple it, whatever you want to do. And then you put soil in that, and then that's biodegradable. You can actually just sink it in the ground and let it grow. You can use, these are egg cartons will work, but also there's to-go trays. So, sometimes you'll also see those, those coffee cup holders that people give you when you're buying a bunch of stuff to go. And those are perfect. I end up recycling a lot of them, and I should be saving them when I get them because they're very useful. Or deli trays, and I use deli trays a lot, either for growing microgreens or for doing these kind of seedlings, because you can get a lot in there. You don't necessarily have to put holes in the bottom because you're trying to keep it in seedling mix for a very short period of time. It doesn't really need it, and it helps to keep moisture in the soil. So lots of ways to go. Some people use cans, old milk jugs, plastic milk jugs cut in half so that you have that bottom piece that's a big tub. Salad containers from the grocery store that have the lids on them. You can put the lid on to get them to germinate, then take it off when they do. Lots of things that we have around already we can use. Now, every kind of seed is going to have a different need for germination in terms of temperature. This is a chart that comes, you can see it on our website for the hotline in this article called Digital Garden Tools. And I think it might have come from Cornell University, or it could have come from UC Davis. I can't remember. I think they both have one, and I can't remember which one I used. But basically, it's telling you what the minimum temperature of the soil needs to be. Outdoor temperatures, if you're planting outdoors, soil's still not up to 50 degrees yet. And the air temperature matters to you for things like corn. But you do need warmer temperatures for some of these hot weather things. That's why there's always that wait to plant things like squash in the garden until it's warmer outside. But something like lettuce, for instance, 35-degree soil, which, we're warmer than that right now, but it'll germinate. So you can put it out as long as the soil is not too wet. The thing you need to be careful of is slugs and snails are out and about too, and they will eat all your little seedlings, which is why sometimes it's better to just start them as little plants and then set them out. But you see the optimum range is still pretty warm. And even for some of these hot weather things, they can have pretty warm soils, which we don't get here. And by the time the soil gets to 75 degrees to get to germinate eggplant, it will be too late to get it growing to even get anything, which is why we start them indoors so early and control that. And why, as you mentioned, you use heat matting underneath. So we'll look at that in a sec, but you can create heat mat to warm that soil to the temperature that things like eggplant, tomato, and all the peppers and all those guys like. So here's a heat mat. These are created for putting seedling trays on. You use them in order to germinate. So something that's at this stage, you don't need to keep it on anymore, especially something like lettuce, which doesn't need that hot of soil. So you would be taking it off, but you can see this is also, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's probably 12. That might be a 60 cell tray. I can't tell. But anyway, cells, again, these are ready to transplant out. Those are big enough. You don't need those big pots. But the heating mats, they all have all kinds of info on them too, which is lovely. You know, gardening products, like they throw information at you. Even you buy a heating mat and they're going to have a chart on it about how to use it. It's wonderful because you can get information everywhere. These are great for things like tomato, peppers, eggplants, anything that needs that warm soil. You can use the top of a refrigerator if you don't have a heat mat, if you have a good sunny spot, or you can put a little light up there with the, the plant sitting in a tray on top of the refrigerator, tray that holds water so it doesn't, drip everywhere. And that heat generated from the fridge actually is enough to help germinate. There's lots of ways to warm things. There you can do cloching when you set things out early. You can also use these techniques indoors as you're starting things, create little artificial shelters. So these are big sort of outdoor garden setting ideas, but you can use the same materials indoors to create. And I noticed you had plastic on your pots, so that same sort of thing. Remay is floating row cover breeds. So it's nice because if you have chambers that are fully plasticized, covered, sometimes you'll get fungal issues in the plants on the soil and they can damp off sometimes. This product breathes but warms. It can warm a couple of degrees underneath it. And it's really great outdoors if you're direct seeding because it's going to help keep insects that fly in and lay eggs in the soil around plants or on them off of them, but it also warms it up enough to speed germination. Timing. So cool weather crops, warm weather crops, both have different sorts of timing, but it's really more a matter of needing to know when you plan to plant them into the garden. You will find often that you're starting your lettuce and tomatoes at the same time because it takes longer for the tomato to get to size, like this guy, which is you'll notice, a recycled cup. It takes them longer than it does the lettuce. So the lettuce is gone and already in the garden by the time these guys are growing up and getting big enough to set out later. So you just need to sort of plan that out. Some things grow faster than others. Something like a pepper is slower than a tomato. Lavender grows slowly. Certain things are just slower in general, and knowing that will help you. Cucumbers, sunflower, those guys pop up very fast and sometimes are better planted directly in a garden. But if you want to grow them indoors, don't do them in March because they will be way too ready by the time it's warm enough to put them out. And seed packets have tons of information. So here's a seed packet for peas. It tells you how much this packet will plant, how far apart to plant your plants, how deep to plant it, how many days it's going to take to come up. And then usually on here, it tells you their harvest. So in here, it's talking about harvest, harvest in 70 days. You click. And then that helps you decide when you start it. So if you're trying to get a harvest in 70 days, and you know that peas can go out early, like peas can go out right now, as long as the soil's not too wet, because the seed will rot. But if it's not too wet, you got to watch for those slugs. You can get it out there, they'll germinate, and then you can have a harvest in a couple of months. And that's kind of what you're aiming for. If you wait until June, now your harvest is late in August, and that's hot for peas. So that's not the right time. So you need to think about what's the crop. Is it cool weather, hot weather? We can help you determine that. And then also look at the sell date for them. So this is 12/19. The older a seed is, the less viable it becomes over time. Some things more so than others. Onions, pretty much you don't want to grow any onions over 2 years old. They don't germinate very well. You can test germination by putting things in a wet paper towel, wrapping them in, put it in a Ziploc bag and lay it on the counter for about a week and open it up. And if you put 10 seeds in there and 5 of them germinate, you have 50% germination rate. And you know that you need to put twice as many seed out in order to get what you're trying to get. But the seed is still good, but not all of it is. And you might get 90%, which means, you just kind of seed is normal. But you can check seed that's older to make sure that it will grow, and then know whether you do need to buy new seed or not. And sometimes we buy new seed because we just want a different variety, right? The Ag Weather Net map with WSU, weather.wsu.edu, you can find the weather station closest to you to determine what outdoor soil conditions are looking like if you want to seed directly into the ground. And they tell you all kinds of things. This map is showing air temperatures at this point when I took this little clip off my computer. If you look at this next one, I pulled up the Puyallup station, which is close to Federal Way, and the air temperature at the time. This is in June, humidity, dew point. You can see the 8-inch soil temperature was almost 70 degrees. So even in the end of June, it's not even up to that 75 that, the eggplant would want to germinate well. So we're not even, able, it would probably germinate. Some of them would and some of them wouldn't, but it's still too late because you need a big size plant at that point in order to get any fruit off of it that summer. But it tells you all this stuff. And you can also look at just the map for soil. You can just look at the whole map and see what the soil temperature is in all the different areas. It's pretty amazing. It tells you when that weather station was installed. And they're always looking for more weather stations to be installed to hook up to their network so they have more information. So I'm very grateful to WSU for doing this because it helps people in the Puget Sound or in Washington State. It's all across the state, know what's going on. Seeds come in all shapes and sizes. You want to follow the seed packet recommendations, but in general, planting seeds at a depth of 2 to 3 times their width is what you're aiming for. This little chart showing centimeters kind of gives you that perspective. The smaller it is, the closer to the soil surface it's going to be. You need them deeper if they're bigger, and you need more soil cover over them. So it's a matter of sort of proportion of soil around them. They need to be deeper if they're bigger because they need more soil over them in order to accommodate that new shoot that's going to come out. If they're really small, it needs to be closer to the surface because it's too tiny. That new shoot that comes out is so small, it wouldn't break the surface for a long time if it was way down here. Take it a long time to grow. So here's an example of all the different ways seeds look. So many different kinds of seeds, all different shapes and sizes that we're working with. These are like, sort of like what pepper seeds look like. Over here, you see some peas. I'm not sure what these guys are. Beans, look how big the beans are.
They're coriander.
This is a coriander. Okay, yeah, you're right. And then up here, I'm not sure what that is either. Anybody? Calendula looks a little bit like this, but it's curlier sometimes.
And it looks like
Corn.
caraway.
Could be. You're right. Yeah. All right. So here's a little bit about seed morphology and why you need those seeds to be where they are in the soil. They have everything they need in them to grow. So they have the beginnings of the new leaves, the first what we call leaves. Well, these are actually not the true leaves. These are cotyledons. I'm not sure why this chart shows them as true leaves, but the first things that come out are the cotyledons, seed leaves, and then the true leaves emerge after that. But there's two in a dicot, like a bean, and in a monocot, which is a grass family. It's corn. There's only one. And then there's a seed coat that needs to be split in different ways. Sometimes it needs to be scratched, sometimes soaked, sometimes cold. Sometimes just lots of warmth and water will cause it to decay and allow all of this process to start. And then the first roots come out and then grow and emerge. That's the first thing that happens. The root pushes through into the soil, starts to push into the soil and develop more lateral roots, and then the first true leaves emerge. And the closer it is, it needs to be the right distance to the top of the soil in order to accommodate the size of that. But they're all ready to go. These are all like seeds have everything they need. They have also all the endosperm, which feeds them until they can start creating their own food. You can protect seedlings while they're germinating. Don't keep them too hot or too cold. Keep the soil moist, but not wet and not dry. You can use that floating row cover. You can use things like these vented plastic domes as well, which are pretty cool. And the nice thing about the domes is that these things can grow for a while in here because they're usually pretty tall. And again, you can see these are multiple chambers. So this is getting a lot of starts in one place. And sometimes people put multiple seeds in each planting bowl because you can divide them apart and you can get even more out of it. When you water, you need to make sure you use really fine streams of water, especially right after you seeded, because you're going to disturb the seeds if you don't. You can bottom water in order. So this is something freshly seeded, and the bottom watering will avoid disturbing everything. And then at the point where these are germinated, you can continue to bottom water, or you can use a very fine spray. This is a conversion of a water bottle with these little devices you can buy, which are pretty cool. But you can also create that out of the cap of a water bottle. You can poke holes. Say this wasn't on here, this was just a cap. You just poke a bunch of holes in here and the same thing's going to happen. So you can use old water bottles to create watering cans. You can use, if you're doing things outdoors or have a hose that you're using, hose in nozzles with fine spray settings. You can use misters that people use for their house plants. Lots of different ways to do that. We use Hint water bottles, which is a product I use, and I just collect all my bottles and use them again for work and poke holes in them and give them away when we do classes for microgreens and things like that, so that people can have them to use. But I like them because they're sturdier plastic than some of these water bottles are kind of crinkly and harder to manage. Well, when you're choosing crops, again, we're back to this cool season, warm season idea. There are things that grow in cooler season soils. Cilantro is one of those that people don't think about. We think about this as a hot weather crop because we're thinking it goes in salsa. And so it must be like part of summer. And it is, and it can grow in the summer, but it also grows in cooler soils. And that is a very fast, like 30-day crop. The beautiful thing about cilantro is it will seed itself and be that coriander seed that you mentioned there, we saw in that picture. You can collect that. You can let some drop and let it reseed itself. The flowers attract pollinators like crazy, especially beneficial insects like the parasitoid wasp, which will lay eggs and aphids. And it's part of the carrot family, has a little umbrella-shaped flower, but they're small. These can be interspersed all throughout a garden. I'm not a cilantro fan. I'm one of those people with the soapy taste genes. So I don't eat the leaf, but I eat the seed, and I love it to grow because of the flowers. So I use it anyway. I just don't harvest from it. I let it go to seed. Hot weather crops are all those things like, that are fruiting in particular. So a lot of the root and leafy crops are cool weather, and a lot of the fruiting plants are warm season. That includes squash family, things like cucumber and summer squash, winter squash, peppers, eggplant, tomato, tons of different things and lots of varieties. And they need to be at plant size for these bigger plants. Squash and cucumber can be planted by seed directly in the garden, or a couple of weeks before you're going to set them out. You don't need to get them very big. It's better if they're not. They actually get stressed if you put them out too big. It's better to start small. Here's an example for growing lettuce. We're looking at that seed chart again. They only need 35-degree temp, or anywhere from 40 to 80. So this is really great information, because you can grow lettuce all summer. You can start it early in the spring. You can put another crop in. You can then do succession sowing. If you grow 20 lettuce plants at once and you are one person or two in a household, that's a lot of lettuce to eat all at the same time. It's going to come ripe at the same time. So put a row in, and then put another row in 2 weeks later. You'll have lettuce continually, and you can keep doing that. You can switch up varieties and use romaine, which is more tolerant of heat in the summer, and use those Bibb and leaf lettuces earlier in the spring. So you can keep doing diversity of lettuce anywhere from April through August. If you're planting it in July and August, it's going to be hotter, drier. You need to accommodate for that. You might want to use remay over it. You might want to be watering more often. You can also plant them indoors and keep planting them outside too. Get a plant a little bigger. Again, the benefit of that is getting it a little bigger past maybe slug stage, and you can put slug traps out to combat that one way. Growing tomatoes, we start them now. So February's anywhere from February through March, mid-March, ideally. You don't want to go too much later, because you want to get them of size. If you have a really good growing greenhouse, March is fine, late March even. But if you're doing them indoors and just under lights, it takes them a while. But you're starting the seeds, then you have these lights on them, and then you grow them and transplant them, and you have to have a place for all of those plants to go. So keep that in mind. Here's a water bottle that's been converted into a water that people are using. And again, you're getting these tall enough that you're going to sink them in the ground. When you plant tomato, you could take bottom leaves off and sink the whole stem, and it will create a stronger plant. These are just some specialty ideas for tomatoes in particular. The red mulch can help to keep weeds down, keep the soil warm. It actually helps warm the soil, but it also keeps, it reflects light up into the tomato and tricks it into blooming and fruiting faster. So that spectrum of light is helpful. And then the wall of waters is good when you want to set them out a little earlier, because when they're little and sitting down in here, this water warms up with the sun, and it lets off heat at night, and it helps to keep them warm. So it's another technique. You do want to take them off after a while. It can get too hot around them in the summer. So, and you want to get them off before you're really disturbing your plants too much. So right about this stage, you should be pulling them off of there. These are the newer versions of these are made so you fill one tube and the whole thing fills. You used to have to fill each tube separately, which is kind of a pain, because you had to hold it up and fill one side and then the other and then the other and then the other and keep going around the thing. Now you fill one tube and the whole thing fills simultaneously. And they're pretty ingenious. Plant early from seeds. You can put these things in the ground. It's a little early for some of radish. You could probably get out there. Beets next, and then carrot. Carrot I usually wait till April to do, when the ground is a little bit warmer. You can plant things. These are all those hot crops. Okra, there's one I didn't mention. That's another one that works indoors early, that you really need to get out early. These would benefit from those wall of waters as well to keep them warm. And then you want to plant these early. You can put them directly in the garden if you want soon, or you can start them indoors and grow them bigger, and you can grow them a little bit later and put some in that will overwinter. Things like kale and cabbages, collards, mustard greens, about a 30-day crop also. So very fast, so you can continually succession seed those. They're going to bolt on you if it gets too hot. They're going to bolt on you if they get past their 30 days. That's their life cycle. There's lots of sowing calendars. This bottom one, I couldn't get a good image of it. It's a PDF from WSU, but it's really great. Maritime Northwest Garden Guide. The whole thing is a planting calendar, essentially month by month, what you can do indoors, outdoors with cover, and outdoors directly. And then this brochure is available off the Garden Hotline website, Growing Food in the City. And that has a planting calendar on the very back that shows when to plant, by seed, and then when harvests are happening. And then visuals of these are nice because it helps you to see how you can overlap things, where you need to leave room. You're going to put your tomatoes out. Maybe you grow a bunch of mustard there because it's going to be gone. And then by the time you get your tomato in, you've had your crop of mustard that you wanted for there. Our frost-free dates for the Federal Way area, April 27th to October 10th. So again, we're looking at things in March. It's not until late April that we're guaranteed frost-free. So anytime after that, if you want to start experimenting with getting those hot weather crops in, you still will need potentially to put protection in because the temperatures of soil will be low and the air temperature is still a little cooler than they like, even though it's not frost. But we run the risk of frosts all the way into April in this area. And I think Seattle's not far from this. It's a little bit earlier in April, but not much. Okay, so this is my final check-in with you guys about what one thing that you learned today will you try in your own garden or your seedling practices. And that's a beautiful tomato plant he's got in his hand. Awesome. Yeah, those are all good things. Super fun. I love gardening. It's so much fun. And you know, all these things. I was thinking too, we're gonna do a if you ever want to come do a visit, let me know because and Elizabeth, you too. At the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands, we have 3 troughs that we maintain for our culturally relevant plant starts work. This year, we're doing 3 types of okra in it. We're going to try to get them out early. We were going to cloche them, and Julia, who's my partner in this, and I were sort of brainstorming, how should we build this? Because our traditional cloches that till cells are big for like an 8-foot bed. These are not that big. We can't use them. But I'm thinking now, maybe what we're going to do is get wall of waters because that's simple and that's showing that technique to people. So you guys, my class today, help me brainstorm something that actually will work for another program that I work on. So come visit us there. And if you want like a tour, just let us know. We'll walk you through and show you what we're doing. We have a pollinator hillside, but there's a whole production farm. There's an orchard. There's various programs that work there. The East African Elders Senior Center program. They have their own little farm plots. There's a production flower farm that those flowers get sold at our farm stand. If you come from June, I think mid-June on, there's a farm stand on Thursdays. There's the greenhouses. There's a wetlands restoration area. That's pretty cool. It's right on the edge of Lake Washington and in Rainier Beach. And last thing is these are our sponsors. So we work at Tilt, we're managed by Tilt, but the folks who actually sponsor us and give us some money to be able to come out and do what we're doing for free for everybody are Seattle Public Utilities, Hazardous Waste Management Program, Rainwise, and Cascade Water Alliance. And these guys, want us to get the message out about sustainable gardening. Yay. I'm excited now. I gotta go start some seeds.
Exactly. It's like getting all geared up. You could say that it presenting this class put a spring in your step.
Exactly. And the sun coming out doesn't hurt either.
It- oh gosh, right? It's like we're almost there.
Yay. Thanks,
Yay,
you guys.
you're amazing. Super amazing. Thank you so much.
You are
You're welcome.
so. Thank you everyone for being here this morning. We wouldn't be able to put on these wonderful classes without you, and especially our wonderful presenter, Laura Matter. Yeah, everything that y'all do at the Garden Hotline, it is such an invaluable part of the community and all the resources that y'all provide, and having your time today doing these lovely classes bi-monthly. So
Yes.
yes, and your next one is, I put it in the chat, I think it's May 4th. I do believe, yes, May 4th at 10 a.m.
What are we talking about in May?
We are doing summer,
Oh, summer bounty. Ooh,
yes, summer bounty.
nice.
So
Yeah, we can go
everything.
into more details about like, how to trellis a tomato and, you know, um, yeah, all those tips and tricks and types of mulches that are helpful for different kinds of plants. And yes,
Oh, yes. I hope we see everyone again. So definitely tune back in. Let us know. Let us, I didn't mean to do that. Uh, let us know how all of these wonderful tips and tricks today helped you with your spring gardens. And bring questions and anything that you might have been questioning about, but also Garden Hotline has a resource always. Y'all's uh, phone lines are always open, right,
yep.
Laura?
Yes, we're there Monday through Saturday from 9 to 5 live. But and sometimes people are out in the field, you'll get the voicemail, but often people are picking up the phone right away. And then but you can leave a voicemail. We also have the email. So if it's 2 a.m. and you have something on your mind, feel free. Because we pick up those emails the next day and do that.
Oh, yay. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been a wonderful class. And thank you so much again, Laura.
Thank you.